You know, despite this year being kinda sucky for me personally, the one thing I really couldn't complain about was the movies. For the most part, it was a pretty consistent year for them, with many just being good, but there was a decent portion that were just outstanding this year. And you're gonna see a lot of horror movies because this was a great year for them. And unlike last year, the majority of the movies for this list aren't animated. Not saying there isn't going to be a couple, but not nearly as many as last year. Because just to be completely honest, the animated movies were not as good. And I also didn't want this video to be like last year where 4 of the 5 movies I talked about were animated from that year. But without further ado, let's dive into the movies I saw in 2025 because we've got a lot to go through.
It's you!
Yes, for some reason, I watched this dumpster fire. I checked it out because I saw Pointless Hub and Shay Frillis' videos on it, along with a rule that I set for myself last year where I have to watch at least one terrible movie. Last year, it was Emilia Perez. And this year, it's this. But you know, unlike Emilia Perez, I could at least laugh at how bad this was and not be infuriated at the fact it was one of the most nominated movies in the Oscars history. Because this was the most laughable ad for Amazon I have seen. It looks like something I would make for a college project, not a multi-million-dollar film. And I don't know what was funnier, Ice Cube's attempt at acting when he saw people get disintegrated, or the fact Roderick from the Wimpy Kid movies was in this, which I find a little weird since he worked on a professional and acclaimed film like Oppenheimer back in 2023. I mean, the film is acclaimed, but not in the way you would like it to be. Like, my guy, please get a better agent if he's making you work on this. I'm not going to talk about this movie that long because I feel it's been talked to death, and everyone and their mother has hit every point I could possibly talk about. But just know that if you do watch this, do it with friends because you'll have a much better time with it.
How?
Jesus Christ. You know, while War of the Worlds is a much worse movie by every standard of a film, this one angered me the most. Since the original Lilo and Stitch is one of my all-time favorite Disney films, and while I usually praise when any of the Disney remakes try to be their own thing and not direct one-for-one copies, what I don't like is when they completely butcher the message of the original, and this one curb stomped the piss out of it. You know how the original's message was Ohana means family and no one gets left behind. In the live action, the new message is Ohana means family and no one gets left behind unless it's convenient for me. Yeah, in this one they introduce a subplot of Nani wanting to go to college for marine biology, which you know isn't a bad thing, but it pisses me off when Nani gives Lilo to the state so she can go study in California. You know, missing the whole point of the original that while Nani struggled with raising Lilo on her own, they always were there for each other and would do anything to stay together. And that meant finally letting other people help her out because there is only so much one person can do. But nope! In this one, Nani just says, screw it, here's the last living member of my family. I hope you find her a good home because I'm going off to I know she has that portal gun, so they can still see each other, but it still really muddles the message. Also, another thing I don't get is why out of anywhere to study marine biology, she chose California over Hawaii. You know, one of the most well-known areas in the US with a thriving marine ecosystem. God, this is stupid. Also, Pleakley isn't in drag, even though that was one of the most recognizable things about his character. Him and Jumba not dressing up is just stupid. Were they worried about offending people by showing an alien in drag? Despite this not being a problem, over 23 years ago when the original released. I would hope that they would stop ruining their actual good original movies, but this made over $1 billion, and a sequel was already announced, so yes, Disney, please keep bending me over and fucking me with your shitty live-action slop.
Chicken jockey!
Well, this was probably one of the weirder movies to come out, since it was met with heavy backlash online at first, but then it became such a joke that people fed into it. And while this was a fun theater experience, the movie on its own is pretty bad. It has impressive set pieces, a really nice tribute to techno, along with some nice cameos from other Minecraft creators. But other than that, it wasn't anything that special. If you're not someone who's a fan of the game, you aren't gonna get anything out of this. And now that we know there is gonna be a sequel in 2027, I don't know how it's gonna be, but honestly, I don't think it's gonna be that great. If you want mine or my friends' deeper thoughts on the movie, I just watched mine or Butterduck's video on it.
Fortnite balls, I'm gay!
I'm not going to stay on this movie too long since I did make 2 separate videos over it, going over the trailer and the movie itself. So I'm just going to summarize my thoughts on this real quick. I think that first third is really rough and gives off the same vibes the trailer did. The humor isn't that great, but there was still an okay amount of laughs. The film had a surprising amount of heart with its characters and a decent relationship with Bull and Honey. The animation is really solid and makes me really sad that we rarely get 2D hand-drawn movies, and I don't think it's Genndy's worst project, but it's far from his best. This was probably the film I was most disappointed by, since in my review of the first, I made it no secret I love that movie, and I had a lot of hope that this would make the second act of the Broadway show better, and it is better, but I feel like you could have done anything and it would have been leagues better than the second act of the Broadway show. Not saying that there weren't elements of this I didn't enjoy. Ariana and Cynthia still deliver great performances, both singing and acting wise. The sets and choreography is stellar, especially with No Good Deeds and Wonderful. Goldblum was just Goldblum, so he was fantastic, and Jonathan Bailey was shirtless, so that woke me up from the movie, actively boring me to tears. But other than these things, this movie was really boring and, dare I say, bad. The main issue I have is the pacing. Holy God, what happened here? The first half crammed in way too much shit, and the movie didn't have a consistent pace until halfway through the movie. It also somehow made one of our best actresses turn in one of the worst performances I've seen all year. It must be an actual talent to make Michelle Yeoh this bad. I know she made it aware to the director that she can't sing, so I'm not gonna blame her for that. But what I can't forgive her for is delivering this flat of a performance. The CGI was also pretty bad in some areas. Then that random flashback of a moment that wasn't in the first one, showing all of our main characters, just felt so useless. And you wanna know what that scene led up to? All that hype around it, it was just a call back to the Broadway show's poster at the end. And to be honest, it wasn't worth it. I don't know if rewatches are going to improve my thoughts on this movie, but considering I already wasn't a huge fan of the second act of the Broadway show, it could have been worse. Okay, before any Wicked fans try to kill me for this take and are angry at FNAF 2 being higher than Wicked for Good, let me put it this way. Wicked definitely had a better story and performances, but this was just so bad it was good. I saw this twice in theaters, and the first time I was like, that was fine. But the second time had me and one of my friends laughing so hard because it hit us with all its goofy campiness. It felt like I was watching M. Night Shyamalan's Old or Trap, where you just give in to the absurdness and have a fucking blast with it. I felt like I was high as hell watching this with how giddy I was. I will wholeheartedly stand on the fact that this shouldn't be at 16% on Rotten Tomatoes, because I have seen far worse horror movies that didn't have me engaged at all and made me hate the whole movie. The Mist. All I can say is I can't wait for the third, because if it's like this, I'm going to have such a good time with this. I love 28 Days Later. 28 Weeks was fine, but when I heard 28 Years was coming out, I was really excited for it. But this turned out to be a really weird movie, because I really liked the first half of the movie when it was focused on the father and son. It had me captivated and intrigued because they had such a good relationship. But as soon as they got back to the island and the son started the journey with the mother to take her to the doctor, it was amazing how fast the quality and my enjoyment dipped for me. I didn't think it was outright awful, but it was noticeably weaker. The reason is because of how much of a tonal whiplash it is. While the first half was definitely more of a slow burn and grounded feel, the second half just went way too goofy, and it put style over substance. And you really feel it when they're on the journey to the Bone Temple, from showing the infected giving birth, the doctor drugging the son while he put the mom out of her misery, and having imagery that, while looking fantastic, just made no sense. And do not get me started on that ending with the old Power Rangers. I know that isn't what they're called, but they might as well be, since they were doing all these flips and stunts and being the most cartoonish thing I have seen. And it pissed me off because I really enjoyed that first half, but then the second half just sucked. And it didn't leave me feeling that excited for the sequel to this. I know I'll probably still see it, but my hopes just aren't that high for it. Oh yeah, Pixar made a movie this year, and it was alright. Gotta be honest, this was probably the least excited I've been for a Pixar movie in a while. The characters were fine, but pretty generic, same with the plot. And I hate that, considering some of the original movies Pixar has released during the 2020s, like Soul, Luca, Turning Red, and Elemental, had both interesting characters and plots. Another thing that I, like many others, feel is that Pixar really needs to change up their animation style. Because even though I am not an avid hater of this style like others are, I do pray they finally change it up, because they're getting outdone by their competition at DreamWorks, who, even when delivering a more mediocre work, have visually distinct and even breathtaking movies. Hell, a good majority of indie works on YouTube look more visually appealing and interesting than most of Pixar's recent output. But at least with their upcoming movie Hopper, at least they're trying to be a little more unique with this style. But honestly, this was probably the most middle of the road I've ever felt with a Pixar movie. Okay, before I get into this, if you Google this movie, it says it was released in 2024, but you know, that's only if you're fancy enough to see it at a film festival, which I'm not, but it got a wide release this year, so I'm counting it. But with that being said, I'm really confused on how to feel about this. Because on the one hand, I like that this was an original idea. It has really interesting concepts and some honest to God really impressive visuals for this only having a budget of $3 million, which that's still a lot of money, but for a film, especially nowadays, that's practically nothing. It has some okay performances, but one of the biggest negatives is the script. Yeah, despite this having a really cool idea, they didn't do a great job at executing it when it came to the dialogue. This felt like Wes Anderson's writing without the charm or wit of it. And I normally don't like to critique child actors since they're still learning and they don't have a huge amount of experience like adult or teen actors. But these child actors weren't too impressive. They're not awful or anything, and there are some scenes where a really good performance shines through, but for the most part, these kids can't carry a whole film. They also didn't do that great of a job, in my opinion, when it came to touching on the grief of losing their mother. You know, despite that being the main reason the conflict exists, so while it's definitely a flawed movie, I still think this was a very ambitious one, and I admire it for that.
Throwing flashbang.
I'm starting to think I'm just not that huge on Alex Garland's war movies because I watched Civil War last year. I thought it was fine, and the same goes with this one. It's fine. I mainly checked it out because Kit Connor is in it and he's slowly becoming one of my favorite actors. He's great in Rocketman, Heartstopper, and did a really good job at voicing Bright Bill in The Wild Robot. It was also cool getting to see Joseph Quinn and Will Poulter. But besides seeing them, the movie was kinda dull. The characters don't feel like actual people. They feel like objects the movie wants me to care about, but I just don't. And I feel bad because I know the story is actually based on real people, but the film is just so boring. There's no other way of saying it. And it does suck because I've seen plenty of war movies based on real people or situations that are great. Films like Hacksaw Ridge, Black Hawk Down, and Saving Private Ryan, to an extent, are based on real events or people, and they're fantastic. But I realize more and more that war movies are impressively hard to make interesting or captivating. But one of the things I will praise is the sound design. It is amazing how well they utilize silence, and when they get hit by an IED, that is easily the best scene of the movie. You know, while I dogged on the Lilo & Stitch remake pretty hard, I surprisingly didn't hate this remake. Not saying it needed to exist, but it wasn't trying to actively butcher the original film's ideas and messages. So that's already better than, let's see, the majority of the Disney remakes. Is this a flawless one? No, I do have issues, mostly with the other writers. Like making the twins not look identical when that was their whole gimmick. Was it really that hard to find a pair of twin actors? Snotlout being surprisingly weaker and less intimidating compared to his animated version, who was more of a dumb and arrogant brute, and you really feel how poorly cast he was with the scene where Snotlout is actively threatening Hiccup in the training ring. And maybe it's because Mason Thames is taller and honestly a bit more built than Gabriel Howell, but all I could think in that scene is Hiccup looks like he could easily kick Snotlout's ass. Along with the acting from some of the writers being pretty amateurish in some areas. Specifically, Nick Frost as Gobber. I just don't buy him in this role at all. Half the time, he just sounded like he was phoning in the lines. But besides those negatives, I can at least praise some of the acting, specifically with Mason Thames. I think he was a great pick for Hiccup. Nico Parker does a decent job, and Gerard Butler reprised his role as Stoic, and he did a good job with it. And normally, I do question why they would extend the runtime of the live-action version, specifically with this one being 2 hours and 5 minutes versus the animated version only being an hour and 38 minutes. But I'll give them this, the stuff added to the scenes and new bits of dialogue I honestly really liked. The conversation Stoic and Hiccup had before he went off to find the dragon's nest was pretty good. I think it was a scene I actually liked more than the original. So, while it is a flawed and unnecessary remake, if we end up getting more remakes like this, I honestly don't think I'd hate them as much. This was a pretty solid entry from DreamWorks. I've always liked the first Bad Guys movie, mostly because of the art style, chemistry, and vocal performances, and I thought this was a pretty decent sequel. The antagonists this time around are much better than Marmalade from the first one, partly because the majority of the time when it's a twist villain, they suck. And Marmalade wasn't an exception to this. But this trio of villains is really good. They're cunning, funny, and an actual major threat. The animation this time around is so much better than the first. This movie had some absolutely amazing set pieces, specifically when they're in space. The only thing I've never been super huge on is the fart jokes, and they squeeze a lot of them in the final act. I was gonna praise how they were very restrained on these jokes, but I can't because they crammed them in the final act. But besides that critique, I had a pretty good time with this, and I'd be excited to see another one. This was a lot better than what I expected. I thought it was a really good time. Jack Quaid was pretty funny in this, and he plays this role really well. It was nice seeing him in something other than The Boys. I thought it was cool that they used an actual medical disorder to justify why he can't feel pain. Also, the soundtrack for this movie is really good. They did a great job at sticking with the theme of he can't feel pain. I'd say the only thing I don't really care for is that it is really long. When you could have easily cut a good 20-ish minutes from this and it would have been fine, specifically with the final battle. It felt like it dragged on so long when it easily could have been cut down, but besides the film overstaying its welcome, it's a very funny, good time.
I am the spy.
I haven't mentioned it yet, but I am a big Wes Anderson fan. I don't think he's made a bad movie, and I was excited to see The Phoenician Scheme, and when I watched it, I really liked it. But after doing a binge of all of Wes Anderson's movies for a future video, I gotta say I think this was probably the only one of his movies that got weaker upon a rewatch, which is weird because it normally is always the opposite for his other movies. Even some of his well-known weaker films like Life Aquatic, I find more things to appreciate on rewatches. While this one just didn't have the same effect. I think it's probably because despite this being a comedy for the most part, it really didn't make me laugh all that much, which is weird because I normally love his deadpan humor. Not saying there weren't any bits that didn't make me laugh, that basketball scene is just peak comedy, but the main thing that I think I was most disappointed by was that the film didn't blow me away like pretty much all of his other movies. I remember being blown away by Asteroid City's concept with storytelling, Fantastic Mr. Fox's stop motion and characters, The French Dispatch's technical aspects, and Grand Budapest Hotel's humor and characters. While this one just didn't make me feel anything. But the one thing I can say I was truly delighted by was Michael Cera making his debut in one of his movies. His character Bjorn was just such a delight, and I'm amazed it took Wes this long to include Cera in one of his movies. He just seems like such an obvious pick for him. But while I don't see it as one of his best, it's still really good.
You're one ugly motherfucker.
I've loved this rebooted Predator franchise. I loved Prey, and this film is no exception. I liked the different stories it told through the different eras of history. The Yautjas in this are some of the most threatening and menacing out of any of the movies. The art style is great and very reminiscent of Arcane's style. However, out of the three stories, there was one I just was not super huge on, and that was the World War II story. I just didn't feel as connected to it like the Viking and Samurai story. The Vikings I felt connected to because there was a goal I could relate to, along with finding out the thing you wanted comes at a cost. And it's the same with the samurai story. While with Torres, what is his goal to strive for other than I fly a plane? He doesn't have a message like the others where they realize the goal they wanted comes at a cost. The most you could point to is the captain, but what connection do we feel towards him? It also doesn't help that he was pretty boring and annoying in this, but as an overall movie, this was a really solid entry in this rebooted series.
The monkey!
This was a really fun time. I'll say this was surprisingly probably the funniest movie I watched all year, from the dialogue being pretty dark but surprisingly comical. The editing in the first half where they just did these abrupt cuts to the funerals fucking fried me. And the kid actor, Christian Convery, is probably the best performance in the movie, because he makes the twins feel like their own characters and he plays them really well for the comedic and dramatic scenes. The only issue I have is the focus on the son. He feels like just such a second thought, and he's easily the most boring character of the movie too. I think if they didn't include the son, the movie probably would have been leagues better.
How are you? I am under the water.
This is a fear I have not made public, but I absolutely hate the ocean, and this film didn't help that fear. I'm pretty confident I don't want to touch an ocean for a long while. It does a great job at making you feel so uneasy. It can get really tense at times. I also really liked Woody Harrelson in this. I'm usually always torn on his performances because I've loved him in films like Zombieland and the Now You See Me series, but for the most part, I feel he just plays the same character, but in this, he plays it very believable, and he was easily my favorite character of the movie. The only thing I wasn't super huge on was Simu Lee, who I usually really like, but he was surprisingly flat in this. But he wasn't in this for a long time, so it didn't affect my enjoyment that much. It's a good watch, and I'd recommend it if you have a chance to see it.
Going dog.
This was a pretty good entry for the MCU, since the recent output has been bad to just very mediocre. Thunderbolts was a breath of fresh air. It made these characters who we haven't seen in any projects for years feel like a real team. They had chemistry, the story was good. It was the first time in a long while I felt any real emotion in a Marvel movie. And it's the first time since Endgame where the world feels connected and like there is an overarching story. I didn't watch Fantastic Four, but I've heard that it was pretty good, and honestly, if the MCU can continue to put quality over quantity from now on, that would be great, because I, like many others, have missed having good MCU movies.
Is that the Grim Reaper?
This was a great entry to the series. The characters are likable, the humor was good, and the story is also surprisingly good. The best thing is that you don't need to watch any of the previous installments to know what's happening, but if you've seen them, you get treated to some nice Easter eggs. It also served as a great send-off to the veteran of this series, Tony Todd. All I'll say is, if you're looking for a horror movie to watch with friends, I can't recommend this enough. A movie that I made a video about and glazed pretty hard, but now that the hype has died down, and after I looked at this months later, where I'm not caught up in the hype, yeah, what the fuck was I smoking saying this was a 9 bordering on a 10? In reality, this is more like a strong 7 bordering on an 8. I do still like the movie, but I don't think it's that good. I do recognize there are a lot more problems with this that I didn't touch on, like the romance between Rumi and Genu, that I don't have as much of a problem with it existing like others, but I can admit that it is pretty rushed. I'm aware they did cut a scene of them going to the aquarium on a date, and it's one of the things I wish they kept in. It would have made their relationship seem more real. Also, the main villain Gima was pretty underwhelming in terms of being a villain. But even though there are more flaws I can point out with this, I still think it's a solid movie.
There's 2 of them!
This was honestly unexpectedly really good. I get it's the same guy who made Parasite, but I didn't expect to enjoy it this much. Robert Pattinson is fantastic in this. He's really proven himself as being a very versatile actor since the Twilight movies. From his performances in The Lighthouse, the Batman, and when he voiced the Heron in Boy and the Heron. I also really liked the romance between Mickey and Nasha, probably the most realistic romance you could get in a sci-fi space movie like this. Also, the movie is fucking funny. I'll probably say you do have to have a bit more of a twisted sense of humor to find it as funny as I did, considering most of the humor revolves around a person dying over and over again. Also, this movie continued Mark Ruffalo dipping his feet into a lot weirder and more artsy projects, and not just the MCU. I loved him in Poor Things, and this was no exception. He is fantastic in this. If you have HBO, I really recommend checking it out, or just renting it for a couple of days.
1A! 1A!
Yeah, this was a pretty good year for superhero projects. Superman, for the first time since the Christopher Reeves movies, is a symbol of hope. He's not like Snyder's version, where he's just actively letting as many people die so he can just aura farm. Clark and Lois have great chemistry, and it feels like a real relationship. Lex Luthor was a great villain, and is how I want Luthor to act. I want him to just hate the very idea and existence of Superman, not whatever Jesse Eisenberg was doing. Mr. Terrific was great. He's easily my favorite side character. Once again, the main issue I have is that there are too many characters, and not everyone gets development or space to breathe. But besides that, it's a fantastic movie. Easily one of my favorite theater experiences. This was the most interesting movie I watched all year. The format they used to tell the story was interesting and engaging, always leaving you on a cliffhanger with one character and then focusing on another to get a piece of the story. The twist was really surprising. I had a friend who said they saw the twist coming because they watched Supernatural. I haven't watched it, but really? I didn't think it was that until way later in the story. This was also surprisingly funnier than I thought it would be. It's not an outright comedy or anything, so if you're worried about that, you don't have to. It was also nice getting to see Brolin in horror, since I've only ever seen him in Goonies, the MCU, and Dune. I just never expected to see someone like him in this genre. Same with Benedict Wong. Then again, I just haven't seen him in any of his other movies outside of the MCU and The Martian, but please cast him in more things. He has some pretty good range. This year has been a really good one for Stephen King adaptations. I haven't seen The Life of Chuck because it's been surprisingly hard to figure out which streaming service has it, without sailing the 7 seas, but I heard that it was pretty good. But The Long Walk is definitely one of the more unique King adaptations to come out in recent years, and it's definitely up there with some of my all-time favorite King adaptations, which, if you are curious about what my favorites are, maybe I'll make a video talking about them. But The Long Walk was an emotional roller coaster. Some parts remind me of Stand By Me with the way the characters interact with each other, because they're just very believable. It also got me so close to crying a couple of times, and I probably would have if I wasn't busy comforting my friend who I saw this with, who was bawling his eyes out. And normally, where I do take issues with most of King's movies being a message into your head, looking at you, Mist, this time around, the message felt very natural and well earned. And that ending is just fantastic. I like how they just left it up to you to decide what happened. If it wasn't for my number one pick, this would have easily been my favorite ending of any movie this year.
Don't come to my house or else I'll suck your dick.
Yeah, I don't think this is a surprise. I think I, like everyone else, just absolutely love this movie. Technically, it's phenomenal, with the twin effect being impressive as hell. And that one take when Preacher is playing and it's showing all of the different eras of music and culture being impressive and so cool. The music is fantastic, with my favorites being Pale Pale Moon and Rocky Road to Dublin. The characters are fantastic. and it was great to see that unlike a lot of horror movies, they actually use common sense and don't act like complete idiots in a dangerous scenario. I like how they use some things I just haven't seen in a lot of vampire movies, being that they can't enter without permission. Also, the choreography is spectacular, and the movie's message is great. You know, I'm not gonna touch on it since it's about race and culture, and I'm one shade away from being Casper's brother, and I don't think I, as a white man who has a Welsh background, should be touching on anything regarding Black or Irish culture. It just doesn't feel right, but this movie is just phenomenal and is easily what I'd call the best movie of 2025. I think that's gonna do it. This video is already incredibly long, but to end off this video and year, I just want to say I do apologize for the lack of videos. This year ended up being way busier than I thought it would be, and thankfully it is looking like this year shouldn't be as busy now that school for me is ending, and the only thing I've got to worry about is my job. So praying and fingers crossed there should be more videos. But that's all from me. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you have a great year. Take care and peace.